Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Petrella, and I'm the event chairperson for Art Without Limits. I hope you're enjoying it. You can applaud if you want. Now, thank you. At this time, we are going to announce the winners of the ArtsLAUNCH grant competition grants. So when you come up, shake my hand, grab your plaque, and stand over here when you get your photo. Okay. All right. So winner of the New Arts Venture by a graduate student is Sydney K. for Sip and Print. Sydney K. up here. Congratulations. There you go. You can go over there and okay. New Arts Venture, and these are New Arts Ventures that will positively impact the arts economy. This is a New Arts Venture by an undergraduate student. It's Sophia Marion for the Fashion Market. Congratulations.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks.
Should mention that these are $500 awards and a chance to work with a mentor and other benefits as on the website. Now, new art by a graduate student, Nicole Malcolm for Don't Forget Me. Now, Nicole's here. There's Nicole. Congratulations. You're welcome. There you go.
Thanks.
And finally, the winner of New Art by an undergraduate student is Brooke Ulrich for Socially Street by Sonder. Congratulations. There you go. And thank you to all who applied. I would encourage you all, if you're a Kent State student, to apply. A lot of great prizes, a lot of great work with a variety of mentors. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Chris Totten, who's going to introduce our next guest.
Hi, everybody. So I have the great honor to introduce one of the modern luminaries of the games industry, Jarryd Huntley. Jarryd began his career in games. One of his first big works in games with his own studio, Polytundra, was Art Club Challenge in 2018. He showed that at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and other museums and art galleries. He wrote a book called Game Programming for Artists, which helps code semi-literate people like me be able to hack some things together. He's currently the senior lead optimization engineer at the VR studio Owlchemy Labs, and he is an organizer of the local Cleveland game developer scene. And last year, he and his team for the game We Are OFK won a Peabody Award for their work. So please join me in welcoming Jarryd Huntley.
All right, okay. All right, hello everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks Chris for inviting me, and yeah, let's just hop in. So I titled this talk, How to Make Your Own Video Game, and 3 easy to follow steps. We all know making video games is easy, so breaking it down to 3 steps should probably be pretty straightforward. Individual results may vary slightly. One bit of advice that I want to give that I give ahead of a lot of my talks is some good advice that I got, which was don't take anyone's advice. And why I say that is it's kind of a warning when you get advice from either a talk or just talking with someone or a mentor. Don't take it and think of, oh, this person did this, so I need to do this, 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 because it worked for them. That advice is something that worked for a particular person at a particular time in particular situations. And so if you try to follow somebody's steps one by one, chances are you might get a different result. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is when you're listening to advice to try to figure out the why. Why did they do this? Try to figure out why they made those decisions. And then second, I kind of mix things up. So my intro and my experience as an entrepreneur is kind of interwoven throughout the talk. So let's hop in. Hello, so I'm Jarryd. As Chris mentioned, I'm Senior Lead Optimization Engineer at Owlchemy Labs. Let's learn how to make a game together. So step one, come up with a good idea. There's a ton of good ideas out there. We just need to pick one. Maybe we want to make an adventure game. Maybe we want to make a narrative game. We just need to nail them down. It should be pretty easy. There's a lot of great ideas out there. Next, all we got to do is just make the game. Or if you don't know how, you can probably find others to help you, but just figure out the make the game part, and it should come together and things should probably work. And then all we got to do is release the game. And then everybody can play. And it should be pretty straightforward to get that all to work. 1 second. So it seems like I'm getting a phone call. 1 second. Okay, I've just been informed making a game in 3 steps isn't easy. All right, so come up with a good idea. Problem with that, how do we know our idea is good? So first, you need to learn about video games. The way you learn about video games is playing video games. I started out playing video games on PC and the NES, and just kind of had fun with them. But on one of my birthdays, I got an N64, and I got Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. And that was the first game that got me to think about game development. It had probably the most complicated God mode cheat in the game. You needed to hold down the R button, the L button, all the C buttons, the Z button, and down on the D-pad, and then you had to move the joystick left and right. It was awful. But what it did is it unlocked all these options in the game. So you could change the textures, you could change the AI behaviors, you could change all these options in the game, and I would spend just hours just kind of messing around with things, crashing the game, and just learning and kind of figuring out how the game worked. My next step was to try and fail at making a game. So when I was in middle school and high school, there wasn't actually a lot of programs or a lot of ways for someone who was younger to get into game development. RPG Maker was probably the best option then, and I tried making some games with that, but especially back then it was pretty limited. This book here, Game Design Secrets of the Sages, that came with this game programming starter kit that came on 2 CD-ROMs. I saved up money, mowing lawns, and bought it and thought it would teach me how to make games. And all those discs had was just C++ and a teach yourself C++ in 24 hours textbook. And they're like, cool, have fun. So that didn't really work. And then at a bookstore, I found this book, Game Programming Gems, and I thought, oh, maybe that would help. But at the time, I didn't realize this was made for professionals in the industry, and me having no programming experience, that didn't really work out so well. So me trying to learn how to make games in high school didn't really work, but I still enjoyed playing games. And so I kind of forgot about making games and just continued on. I finished high school. I was considering studying music, but switched to computer science at kind of the last minute. So in school, I studied computer science, at the University of Schmackrin, because we're at Kent. But I studied computer science, and so I was learning how to program and learning, just the ins and outs of computer science, kind of the basics and building from there. And about halfway through, I realized, hey, I'm learning how to program. I used to, want to learn how to make games. I guess I can kind of figure out if I can program games. So I found a book. I started to teach myself pretty much everything about game development and game programming. I pretty much dove into any resource I could find. There was a lot of resources online, podcasts. I joined different online communities and just started teaching myself game development. But the next kind of step was, I just had all these questions and wanted to find people to talk with them about. So my next step was to look for community. And this is one of the big pieces of advice that I'd give anyone in any sort of creative or entrepreneurial pursuit is find others. It's crucial. Find others that are doing what you want to do, that are on the same path. It's important to share notes, lessons learned, resources, etc. So I started looking for a community and then realized I'm in Ohio. No, but I say that jokingly, and I'll circle back to Ohio, but what I found was the Cleveland Game Developers. It was just a group of people making video games. Like Chris mentioned, I'm one of the organizers of the group. If you're not familiar, we're a group of writers, artists, programmers, just anyone who's interested in game development. We have members who are in high school, we have members who are retirees, we have professionals in the industry, people who do it for fun, so kind of anyone and everyone. But this community was absolutely crucial for me to start my game development journey. I started being able to talk with people, I started being able to ask questions, bounce things off of people, and really start to hone my craft and my skills. A big part of that growth process was game jams. If you're not familiar with the game jam, it's usually a 48-hour event where we make games over a weekend. So a theme is announced on Friday night, we brainstorm and then kind of break off into teams and start making a game. And because the theme was secret, nobody was able to bring this project that they were working on for 2 years and say, hey, here's my project. Everybody's starting from the same place. Oftentimes, you don't finish what you were anticipating getting done at the beginning of the game jam, but it's always a great learning experience. And so joining the Cleveland Game Developers was essential for me to continue my career, but at this point, I was still thinking of game dev as just a hobby. But my next step was, after I graduated, I started working in IT. That was kind of how I started my professional career. I started working at Sherwin-Williams in kind of their web engineering department. And then I worked at a number of different either startups or just kind of large tech companies. And like I said, I was still just thinking about game development as a hobby. I was still going to the local game developer meetings, but it wasn't anything that I was considering doing professionally. My first kind of start on that maybe transition was I started teaching game programming at Lorain County Community College. And that was a really great opportunity for me to reaffirm my knowledge, because if you want to know if you understand something, the best way is to teach someone else. And so by teaching game development, I was able to start to realize that, I guess I had kind of learned a lot, and I guess, I had things to share. I had experience that was useful to help pass on to others. And around that time, I started volunteering as one of the organizers with the Cleveland Game Developers, and that just kind of helped me make new connections. It also gave me opportunities to mentor, make friendships, and open up opportunities within the community as well. So at this point, how do we know our idea is good? I think if you've gone through these steps, maybe we've fixed this. So the takeaways for this first step are you can find community anywhere. It doesn't matter, if you're in Cleveland, Arkansas, South Africa. There's a ton of places where people are making games, and if there aren't people locally, you can connect with people online. Find a focus. So my focus ended up being game programming. I'm experienced in game design. I have experience in audio as well, but my focus is game programming, and that's kind of my main skill. Then the other point is all experience, even indirect, can be valuable. A lot of times I'll talk with students and they'll say, hey, I don't have a job lined up right after, graduation. Do you think it would be okay if I start working here or here, while I'm looking for a job? And absolutely, work experience, job experience, experience with your craft, experience with your focus, it's all things that you can pour back into your passion. So next, we have to make the game. The issue here is how. All right, so the next step in kind of my journey was going to GDC. GDC is the world's largest game developer conference. It happens in San Francisco every spring. I had always, looked at GDC, and like I said, I was just thinking about game development as a hobby. So I looked at GDC and like, that's cool. I'll never make it out there, but I'll see pictures and things like that. But one year, one of the friends that I had made through the community was like, hey, there's this scholarship to GDC, you should apply for it. It was on Twitter, I found it, there was like a ton of replies. I was like, oh, there's no way. But I sent the person a message, and then I heard back the next morning that I had got the scholarship. And it was a scholarship for underrepresented people and demographics in the game industry. So now I needed to plan a trip out to San Francisco. I'd never been to California. I'd never been to the Game Developers Conference, and I just kind of had to figure everything out as I went. It was a lot, it was overwhelming, but that was kind of that turning point for me where I started thinking, oh, this passion that I have for game development as a hobby, maybe I can turn that into a career, Being in the heart of the industry and just talking with people who are doing it as their career, I was basically like, I don't think I can go back to working at a bank in a cubicle. I think I need to figure out how to work in the game industry. One of the issues was, at the time, there weren't a lot of game studios in Cleveland or Ohio at that point. And so I was trying to figure out, how I might be able to make this transition into game development. Nobody was really hiring remote workers at that point. So really the only option that I saw was, I guess I'll figure out how to start my own company and kind of go from there. I unfortunately was, talking with some mentors I had, and one of them, when I told them about my idea to start my own company in Cleveland and start working on games, told me, you're gonna waste your time, it's impossible. The only way to work in the game industry is to move out to California, start from the bottom, and work your way up. And for a while, I internalized that, and I was just like, I guess this isn't something I can do. I can't move to California right now. There's things tying me here, so I guess I'll just give up. But then I realized, actually, that advice was just something that worked for him at that time, and it seems like it hadn't worked for him in a while since, so I was like, I'm gonna ignore his advice and just kind of figure things out. So this, I didn't realize at the time, was my start as an entrepreneur. Becoming an entrepreneur wasn't ever one of my goals. It was just something that was kind of a means to an end. And Susan mentioned this in her talk earlier, that there isn't really a perfect time to start becoming an entrepreneur, and so you just really got to start. So this was kind of my start for that. So the next step for me was to find mentors. If you are looking to get into something or trying to learn a skill, one of the best ways is to find people who are doing what you want to do and ask them about it. Even better if you can find ways to hang out with them. So I started looking for people that, had kind of small studios, maybe between, 2 and 12 people. They were outside of the kind of traditional game development hotspots like Los Angeles, Seattle, New York per se. And so I started trying to look for those mentors. And then I realized I'm in Ohio again. This is one of my favorite clips where somebody replaced all the dragons in Skyrim with the state of Ohio. But I started looking for mentors, and one place I found mentors were outside of Cleveland. In particular, there's 3 cities that were really helpful and instrumental for me growing my career, and that's Toronto, New York City, and Chicago. A lot of the studios in those cities are small studios started by indies or small developers. I had some connections with them, and so I just started traveling to conferences at those cities, talking with people at the conferences. I started, making friends and just asking people questions. It could be like, how do you start a bank account as a business? How do you file for an LLC? It could be, big questions or small questions. But just having someone you can bounce a question off of is incredibly helpful when you're starting a company, when you're starting a business, especially if you find people who are in the same sort of phase. I ended up making some close friends with some folks from Toronto who are in kind of the same phase of their career looking to start their own studios. And we were able to bounce ideas off of each other and keep in contact. The other place I found mentors were in the startup community in Cleveland. If you're not familiar with it, there's a big startup community in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, the greater kind of region. And there's a number of organizations, there's a number of conferences, events, and I just started going to those. And going to those events, I could ask people on how they got funding for their startups, how they structured their business, how do you do invoicing, a lot of the kind of boring business things, but nonetheless important to learn. The other place I found mentors was in the Cleveland game developers. One thing that I see a lot of people kind of overlook is when people are looking for mentors, they think that they have to be this, kind of sage, person who has all this experience and can answer all your questions. There's nothing wrong with having mentors that are less experienced than you, mentors that are younger than you. You don't have to have one person and that's your mentor. You can have multiple mentors. And that's kind of how I ended up getting a lot of my experience was this person is a mentor in this area, this person is a mentor in another area, and kind of patching together kind of a network of experience from these different mentors. The next thing that kind of happened in my career was I was at the Game Developers Conference, and I was having a conversation with one Chris Totten. I mentioned this idea for, I thought, what would be a blog, teaching people who had an art background how to program games, and I mentioned that to Chris, and he was like, "That's a really good idea. You should talk to my book publisher." And I was like, "What?" And so he walked me over and started that conversation. And that ended up, through a series of events with me co-authoring a book with Hannah Brady, who is a narrative designer and writer for games, co-authoring the book Game Programming for Artists, which is a programming book written for non-programmers. The issue that we found when we were working on the book is a lot of programming books are written by programmers for programmers, and you need to understand programming lingo to understand programming, which is a bunch of circles. And so if you don't have experience or if you're kind of not in that world, it can be really difficult to jump in. So this book, at this point, we know is used in multiple universities. There's copies in some different studios. And we know it's been used as a communication tool in studios to help the artist understand the programming side better and help with those lines of communication. And even though this isn't directly related to making games, like we were talking about earlier, all experience, even if it's indirect experience, is really helpful for working on growing your craft. The next thing for me was finding a strong game concept and building on it. Like Chris mentioned, my first debut solo indie title was called Art Club Challenge. It was a mobile game that taught people how to make art through puzzles. One of the issues that I saw with making the game is when you try to teach people art and they don't feel comfortable with art, they are pretty resistant. But if you design a game that teaches them and they don't realize they're learning about art, it can make it a lot easier to introduce them to that idea. So it was based on the art style of Piet Mondrian, and you just have 4 colors and you put together shapes to make pieces of art. As Chris mentioned, it was shown at the Smithsonian American Art Museum arcade, which was a super cool event to show off my game about art in one of the greatest art institutions. And the idea for the game actually came from a game jam. I mentioned game jams earlier. I prototyped the game during a game jam. It was received really well, and so I decided to continue building on it to, and then plan to release it commercially. So we've learned about how to make a game. We can call this one fixed. The takeaways for this section are you can find mentors pretty much everywhere. You can find mentors in your city. You can find mentors online. Finding mentors shouldn't be a barrier to learning from others. And then, like we spoke about, mentors don't need to be in your exact field. Some of my best mentors actually know nothing about video games, but maybe they know about communication or running a business. But you don't have to try to find that one specific mentor, that one mentor myth. I feel like that's kind of like a Hollywood type thing, perpetuating that myth that there's this one person that has all the knowledge you need to gain. So when looking for mentors, don't think you need to find one person. You can kind of spread it out. And then the last point is complementary projects help provide experience and new opportunities. I can't tell you how many times, my experience as a musician, or my experience building community, or my experience working at some random tech job have come in usefulness with me as a game developer. So sometimes it just takes creativity to think about what you're doing and how you can apply that to your career in games or whatever your pursuit is. All right, so step 3, the last step. This should be the easy one. Release the game. So when I was working on finishing up my game, there was just so much work to do, and I realized I wasn't going to be able to finish it alone. So I was able to hire 2 local students to help me work on finishing some of the design, some of the UI, and some of the work that I needed to complete the game. I also hired a marketer from Chicago, somebody who I'd met through one of those conferences. She was specifically a game marketer and took over the marketing and PR. And then I also hired somebody to work on the trailer for the game. So when you're thinking about starting an entrepreneurial endeavor, one of the most important things I think is, as a founder, you should learn, or at least learn about everything, but also you should learn when it's not something you should do. So I learned about marketing, I learned about, making trailers and things like that, but I don't want to be a marketer, and so I was able to find someone else to do that. As I said before, my focus is game programming, and the puzzle design for the game was fun, but it wasn't the funnest part for me. And so Leah, one of the students, actually took over the game design of the puzzles, and that just kind of made our whole process work much smoother. And then the other thing that happened around this time is I didn't fully quit my job and jump, both feet first into game development. I did what you call, kind of half quit my job. I stopped my full-time job at a large enterprise company and started working part-time. So I was working part-time for myself and part-time at another company. But unfortunately, when I released the game, it had poor sales. It was well reviewed. A lot of game designers, there's a tweet from Zach Gage, who is an incredible game designer and said some great things about my game. So the feedback on the game was great, but it didn't hit commercial success. And that's why, it was pretty crucial that I had that part-time job and I was able to use it as a little bit of a cushion. It wasn't a plan forever, but it was just kind of a transitional plan. But my next step in the journey was finding ways to work on other cool games. So at this point, I released my game. It didn't sell great. I have experience as a game programmer. I have experience releasing a game commercially. And something I'd always been interested in was porting games, specifically taking games that were released on like PC or mobile and helping them to release on console. So my first porting project was a game called Quench with a team out of Toronto that I'm good friends with. That was a really great project to work on. I got to learn how to work with Nintendo Switch hardware and got great experience. Once I had that experience, I was able to pour that experience into the next game that I helped port, Earth Knight. And that was such a big porting project and such a short timeline that I actually was able to hire one of the game developers from the local game dev group to help me with that porting process. And so this was kind of the steps on me starting to build my studio and build my company. But then around that time, I was also doing, contracting for some smaller startups and things, making mobile games. But around that time is when there seems to be, had a little bit out of order. But yeah, around this time is when I started giving a lot more talks. I had built up a lot of experience in game development. I had started to network a lot, and I had a lot of valuable advice that I could share. So I've had the opportunity to give some talks in some really cool places. I've spoke at GDC, the Game Developers Conference. I've had the opportunity to speak at a conference in Uruguay in South America. I spoke at the Central Asian Game Show in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And I've just been able to connect with people and network and continue to grow. So networking is one of the most crucial parts of building your business and building your company. I think Bobby said it in his talk earlier that you're always, interviewing, and it's kind of the same thing. You're always networking whenever you're talking with people, and sometimes a conversation from months or years ago might turn into a contract or a connection to somebody else. So whenever you're at conferences or you're meeting with people, think to put your best foot forward because it's a networking opportunity. But around this time is when I got an email about a really cool game to work on. So this is the game We Are OFK. It's an interactive animated series. It's episodic, and it's about the story of the band OFK. It's the story of how they met, the struggles that a band forming in Los Angeles and people working in the creative industry go through. It was a really great team to work with. They were based pretty much all over the US and a little bit around the world. And I started on the project right around 2020. So right when, the pandemic happened and kind of the world was falling apart. But it was a really great team. We were close-knit and just had a lot of fun working on the project. And here's some screenshots from the game. The game is split into 5 episodes. Each episode has a playable music video. And we released a physical version and had some cool merch to go along with it. And then the virtual band from the game, some of the members from our team were able to perform concerts as the band, which was just really cool to bring that to life. But working on OFK brought some really cool opportunities. So we were nominated for a Game Developers Choice Award and an Independent Games Festival Award. We won an audio award for Indiecade. And then when we announced our game on Nintendo Switch, I got to be part of one of the Nintendo Indie Directs, which blew my mind because I was a Nintendo fan growing up, so being able to be on one of those was just super cool. But as Chris mentioned, probably the coolest opportunity of all was us winning a Peabody Award. And this still just feels like a fairy tale. And going to Hollywood and being able to accept that award with our team and just kind of celebrate the work we've done and being recognized for that was just the opportunity and experience of a lifetime. So this is something that I'll treasure forever, and just super special being able to spend that with our team. But around this time, after releasing OFK, I was dealing with a little bit of burnout. When you're an entrepreneur and when you're working for yourself, your hardest boss is yourself. And sometimes as entrepreneurs, we push ourselves a little bit too hard. There's a statistic, I couldn't find an exact number on it, but a statistic that I think 71 to 90% of founders report struggling with mental health. And so when you're founding a company or a business, it's really important to be honest with yourself on how you're doing and how hard you're pushing yourself. And so kind of dealing with burnout, I was looking for just kind of a steady, stable studio job and ended up joining Owlchemy Labs, which is a great team. We're based all around the US and Canada, and I've been at Owlchemy Labs for about 3 years. But, you know, always still being an entrepreneur, one of my requirements for looking for a studio job was still being able to work on personal projects. And thankfully at Owlchemy, that's not a problem at all. There's a form we have to fill out, but we can still work on our own projects. We can still work on our own games, commercial games, but it's been a really great team to work with. And we've been working on a game called Dimensional Double Shift. It's a VR game where you're able to run a interdimensional diner and car repair store with up to 3 friends. It's hand-tracked, so if you want to pick up something or interact with it, you just pick it up virtually. And you can play online with your friends, and there's a lot of events and chaos. But like I mentioned earlier, in my transition into working full-time in IT to working in games, I started porting games. Then now I work at Owlchemy. One of the cool things about either doing contract work or working for a studio is someone basically is paying you to become better at your job. Someone's basically paying you to learn more skills. And so even though I took a break from working on my own games, I was able to still gain experience and gain more skills, so when I work on my games, I have more knowledge and things that I can apply to my games. The other thing that's pretty crucial in your career as an entrepreneur is sustainability. So this is a talk I gave at GDC this past year. It's about this framework I created called Career Trees. The kind of TLDR for it is a lot of times when we're thinking about planning out our futures or planning out our careers, we think of them linearly. Like, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do this. And rarely in life, careers work out like that. Sometimes you'll start here and you'll have this job, then you'll be working 2 jobs and going to school, then you'll continue with this job. And career trees are a way of kind of breaking things down visually so you can plan out things simultaneously. If you go to that URL, what is a careertree.com, that will take you to this GDC talk. It's about 20 minutes. It's pretty quick, but in that I go over career trees in depth and kind of explain different ways of approaching your career and planning things out with keeping sustainability in mind. So we have 3 steps to making a game, and then we just need to repeat this, and we can just continue to churn out games. I'm still working at Owlchemy Labs now. It's a great place to work, but I'm on the side starting to spin up some of my own personal projects again, starting to prototype and look at what I want to create next. So the releasing the game part was easy. All right, and so the takeaways from that section, the step 3, are 1, don't base your success on your game's success, if possible. So, like I said, I still had my part-time job when I released my game, and then I was also able to start contracting for other studios. So if there's a way you can build into your business a mode of being able to tolerate failures, that's something that will just help you keep your business, your company, your initiative going for longer. Also, figure out what sustainability means for you. So if sustainability means taking a break from working for yourself, if sustainability means finding a business partner, if sustainability means pivoting your business, I always recommend going with sustainability rather than trying to chase, what's hot, what's popular, what's, the latest trend. Because if you burn out, then you're not going to be able to do anything. So if you find what's sustainable, that's just going to help you be able to continue working that much longer. And then the last point, like we spoke about, working on other games is experience you can put towards your own games. So I can't tell you how valuable the experience was working with different types of teams, different sizes of teams, different types of projects, different code bases. All of those things just helped me hone my craft, learn how to be a better programmer, learn how to be a better engineer, game designer. And those are things that I can take with me for the rest of my career. All right, and so wrapping up, a few more points to keep in mind. Be careful about trying to follow someone's advice. Like we were speaking about in the beginning, don't take advice and just try to follow it step by step. Try to learn the reasons why somebody made a decision, try to learn the motivation behind decisions, and see how you can potentially apply those to your own life and your own career. The most important things in my mind, if you're starting a company or want to become an entrepreneur, are to find community, find places to gain experience, find sustainability and what that means for you, and mentors. And this is kind of tied to that first point where all of those things might be different to each person. I can't tell you where to find the best community for you or the best way to have sustainability for yourself. That's something you'll need to answer, but if you're finding those 4 things, I think you're well on a great path to finding success. And then lastly, all experience, even indirect experience, is valuable. My first job in high school was teaching music lessons. I wouldn't necessarily think that teaching music lessons would help me become a better game developer, but a lot of the interactions I learned with, finding clients and managing just, what was a small business at that point were things that I was able to apply later on. So if you need to, take a break from your pursuit, or if life takes you in a different path than you were intending, don't think that's, a dead end and, you need to give up or anything. More likely than not, there's experience that you're still gaining that you can apply in, the situations if you just think about it and think through it a little bit more. So I think we learned how to make a game in 3 easy steps. I hope everybody remembers those 3 easy steps and makes games. But I want to thank you all for coming to my talk and spending some time. And yeah, if you're interested in contacting me, these are the best ways to contact me. I'm at Jarryd Huntley on everything except for Blue Sky, where I got locked out of my first account because of a Blue Sky bug. It wasn't my fault. So just added 2 there. But yeah, thank you. Did we have time for questions? All right, questions.
So this one is oddly specific, but I would love to go into recreating prehistoric creatures like dinosaurs and all that jazz. How did you get in contact with the Smithsonian and folks that are around that field area of study?
Yeah, so the Smithsonian was a yearly showcase they did. So they had an application period where you could submit your games, they would get reviewed, and you could get accepted into that. But honestly, sometimes just finding, going maybe the Cleveland Museum of Art or the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, going to their website and finding someone's email address and sending them a polite email. A lot of times those folks don't get very many emails, and this is an opportunity to talk about something they're passionate in. And a lot of times I've found when you want to talk about something that somebody's passionate in, there's a good chance that they're excited. And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with sending out an email and, just asking if they'd be willing to, spend a little time chatting with you, or if you could buy them coffee. The other opportunity that I recommend is just telling that to everyone. When I was looking to get into porting games, I hadn't ported games before, but everybody I met at conferences, I would say, hey, I'm Jarryd, I have a small studio, Polytundra. I'm, looking to start porting games. And even though it wasn't something I was doing, I was just putting out all these little seeds. And after a couple of months, people would be like, hey, you're the guy who's looking to port things. Do you have an opportunity for this? So if you just mention it, to kind of anyone and everyone, more than likely, you'll eventually find, someone who's maybe 1 or 2 degrees separated from, someone you're trying to get in contact with.
Game that you made, let's see. Was it an EDM game first until Nintendo picked it up?
Was it a what game first?
Yeah, like an Indian game, like.
Oh, yeah, so it was an indie game. We self-published it. So Nintendo didn't pick it up. We applied to be part of their development program. And then after we were accepted into the program, we were able to work with Nintendo to release our game on Nintendo Switch.
Hello, testing. All right, good. All right, I am a character creator, and I write characters, make stories, all of that stuff. Is there any good websites or tools you could help me out with, by anything that would help with character designing and stuff? I'm just struggling on that part, virtually, of course. I could draw on paper, but not on virtual.
So you're looking for tools to help with designing characters visually?
Yes, sir.
Honestly, the 2 things that come to mind are one, just kind of, traditional art with figure studies and things like that. And then the other one is fashion. On We Are OFK, our character designer is actually a fashion designer by trade. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of, complementary in fashion design. But as far as learning 3D tools, I think, the best I would recommend is Blender. It's free. There's a ton of tutorials. But then on top of that, finding some Blender communities to join. I know there's different communities on Facebook or different kind of forum communities. But I think, if you find other people who are in the same boat, you might be able to get advice that way. Mm-hmm.
So basically, wait, I'm sorry, I got nervous. What helped you stay motivated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because when you're, working on a project, especially, kind of the long stretches of working solo, there are times when I'd lose motivation. What I found works best for me is to not work solo. If I'm working solo, I often lose, motivation and just kind of, things fall off. But even if I have one other collaborator, like on the book when I co-authored with Hannah, just having one other person that I can talk about, that we can bounce ideas off of, that we can, keep each other in check. I've found for me that having one other person on a project keeps me motivated.
What was the hardest part for you?
Ooh, the hardest part. I think the hardest part was when I quit my full-time job and kind of, needed to go on my own. Because, that was just kind of that leap of faith where it's I've been building up these skills over, months in the past couple of years. Am I going to be able to support myself? Am I going to be able to support my family? Is this going to work out? And it's a really big step to take. But I think, and then, once I made that step, I actually didn't make pretty much any money working for myself the first year. My partner still had a job, and so we were able to make it work. But struggling through that first year was really difficult. It was really demotivating, but it freed up a lot of time where I was able to network more. And then after a little bit, those networking opportunities started turning into contracts and work. But yeah, I think that was maybe the most difficult for me.
You talked about designing games for younger generations. I'm wondering if you've thought about designing games for people with dementia or in nursing homes and assisted living communities to help them.
Absolutely, no, that's a great question. So I can't talk about the specifics too much, but one of the companies I worked building mobile games for was building games for adults aged 50 and up. And it was some of them were designed to help with keeping people, just kind of active and thinking. But I also have a friend in the game industry, Bob DeShooter. He's a professor and researcher who focuses on games for the elderly, because we all play games now. We definitely want to keep on playing games as we get older, but if nobody's thinking about, designing games for the older generation, we're not going to be able to play games. So that's kind of his pitch for thinking about design elements that are inclusive of kind of all ages and all experience.
Hi. Out of curiosity, you mentioned okay, I'm just gonna summarize this. What kind of game design software do you recommend for people who are just starting off in game design?
Got it. There's a couple of different answers I'd give to that question. If you're thinking about 2D games, there's something called Construct 3 that's pretty straightforward. Game Maker could work for that. But also pen and paper. If you're working on 2D and you can figure out your designs on paper, that's one of the quickest ways of prototyping. If you're thinking about working in 3D, Unity is a little bit difficult, but once you get a handle on it, you can pretty much do anything. But I think the other piece of advice is, pick one tool and as best as you can, try to master it. It's kind of easy to jump around from this tool, then try, the new shiny on that tool, but if you just kind of stick with one tool and start and work towards finishing and releasing a game, even if you're just releasing it for free, that's going to teach you so much about just kind of the process of making a game, the concessions you have to make, the types of issues you need to work around. I'd recommend, learning one tool and kind of, getting super comfortable with that.
My question is just, do you know anything about the video game music industry, and would you have any advice for someone wanting to go into that area?
Yeah, no, another great question. So I do have a number of friends who work specifically in the video game music industry. It's very small, tight-knit, and difficult to get into. I think the advice I'd give is just start writing music for games. Whether that means like inventing, just kind of your own game, maybe having someone create some art for it, and then writing a score for a game that doesn't exist, is a great way of just kind of thinking about how does this music relate to the design in the game, the visuals. The other piece of advice I'd give is find some game jams. Game jams are an opportunity to, over a weekend, have a game to work on. And usually at game jams, musicians are in high demand. I know up in Cleveland, we usually have, I'd say about like 8 to maybe 13 or 14 games, and we usually only have 2, maybe 3 composers. And so usually the composers are composing for like 3 or 4 games. And so if you are able to join a game jam, those are opportunities to get your music into a game and get that experience.
We have time for one more question, and after that, we're going to end, but I see a bunch of hands. So what we're going to do is anybody that has a question afterwards may speak with Jarryd in the lobby so we can get set up for the next one.
My question is, what helped you the most when you were inventing and creating games?
Got it. Yeah, I think the thing that helped me the most with, coming up with game ideas and concepts is just general experience, life experience. A lot of times people think, oh, you're studying video games, you have to play a lot of games to learn how to make games. And that, I feel, is just kind of like this circular logic. And if you have other hobbies, if you have, other things you like to do, other things you like to learn, you have the opportunity to bring all these different ideas, these different concepts into making games. And a lot of times there's things that haven't been done. So if you just, continue to just explore and learn just about anything, I think those experiences give you a lot of opportunities to put that into your game development. So that's where a lot of it came from me. You know, my experience as a musician. I like going to museums, having, you know, a pet dog, you know, are all things that you can use to help make game concepts. All right, well, I think that's it. I will be out in the lobby and would love to answer any more questions, but thank you.